So I recently went through something I didn't think could happen to my family. One moment we were just living, the next we were staring down hired guns sent by our own HOA. And the reason they gave? A trench. But that wasn't the truth. No, the real story was so much darker, so dark it still rattles me when I close my eyes. Funny thing is, the only thing that didn't meet HOA standards that day was the mercenary we tied to a fence post. But it didn't start with guns or trespassers. It started with something small, something that should have been harmless. The sound of my rebuilt '69 Mustang, that car was my soul poured into steel. When I fired up that 302 V8, it wasn't quiet. It roared like thunder trying to punch through bedrock. The porch swing rattled. A hawk launched off the barn roof in a panic, and I smiled because that roar wasn't just noise, it was freedom. Marie stood in the barn doorway with that half-smile she always gives me when I do something reckless but beautiful. And Joe, old, stubborn Joe, rocked in her chair on the porch like a gunslinger waiting for the saloon doors to swing open. For a moment it was perfect, until he showed up. Greg, white polo, khakis, clipboard clutched like it was scripture. He stepped out of his house like someone pressed play on a bad sitcom. He looked at me, then at the car, and he didn't waste time. "You testing for earthquakes," he barked, "or just trying to violate the decel clause?" I killed the engine. My blood was already boiling. "That's not noise," I said. "That's craftsmanship." Greg didn't flinch. Page 16, noise regulation, compliance required. I stepped forward, signed it to live here, didn't agree to let you run a dictatorship with a decibel meter. Marie joined me, calm but sharp. "We've got 15 acres, nearest neighbors half a mile away. Who exactly are we disturbing, Greg?" That's when he smiled. Not a big smile, just enough to flash his teeth. "Some people think land gives them immunity, but this isn't the Wild West anymore. You're still accountable." He shoved an envelope into my hand and walked off without another word. That night, Joe read the letter out loud while stirring beans on the stove. Section 12, A, prolonged exposure to disruptive mechanical noise. Fine, $200. She tossed it into the fire like it was nothing. But Marie was different. She sat at the table flipping through the HOA charter with her brow furrowed. "They can't do this. Not legally," she whispered. Joe didn't even look up. Don't matter if it's legal, matters if they think they can get away with it. The next morning, Greg came back. But he didn't come alone. This time he had Tom with him, thin, pale, the kind of man who looked like he flossed with spreadsheets. And Linda with her sun hat and her fake church lady smile dipped in poison. The three of them parked past the front gate and marched up like they owned the place. Greg shoved a clipboard at me. "Cease and correct notice. This property is now under formal violation review." I laughed, escalating fast, "Aren't you?" Didn't even give us time to frame the last one. Tom stepped forward, stiff as cardboard. "This isn't personal, it's procedural." "Procedural?" I shot back. "Is it procedural to trespass on land you've never set foot on before last week?" Linda's smile tightened. "You have the right to appeal." Marie stepped beside me, calm but steady. "Does that appeal come with a fair hearing, or just more procedures until we're priced off our own land?" Greg's face didn't change. "You'll be notified." That's when Joe moved. Shotgun strapped across her chest, cane in her other hand, her eyes were flint. "Just so we're clear," she said, pointing at the sign nailed to the fence. "Private land, armed residents, you three walked past that sign, which means you're trespassing." Tom swallowed. "We were invited under HOA authority." Joe raised the shotgun half an inch. "You want to test whose authority counts out here." They didn't, they left, quick. But it didn't end there. That evening we found a neon orange notice zip-tied to the gate. Mandatory property review, 72 hours, signed by Karen Duval, the president herself. Marie's face went pale. She's finally showing her face. Joe spat into her tin. "Knew it. Greg ain't got the spine for this. She's the one hiding behind the curtain." That night, Marie pulled up the HOA's back-end files on her laptop. The glow of 3 monitors lit her face. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "She's amending the bylaws live," she whispered. "Look at this, emergency property seizure in cases of pattern noncompliance. All it takes is 3 board signatures." I felt my chest tighten. Joe muttered what I didn't want to hear. "They're not coming for the car, kid. They're coming for the land." And suddenly I remembered my grandfather's words. You don't prepare for the fight you see coming. You prepare for the one they'll pretend isn't happening. The next morning I walked the back fence line, past the equipment shed, down by the stream bed. That's where I saw it. A black plastic stake half buried in the dirt. I pulled it out, turned it over. At the bottom was a logo I didn't recognize, Blackbird Development. Marie came up behind me, barefoot in the grass. When she saw it, her face froze. "That's not local," she whispered. She flipped it, studied the stamp. "It's a surveyor's marker, which means they've already mapped it." I looked back at the house, the barn, the porch where Joe sat every evening, the pine tree my grandfather planted, the corral I rebuilt with my own hands, and then I looked at that stake. They weren't warning us, they weren't threatening us. They were preparing the ground. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an invasion. And I wasn't about to roll over. Not on my land, not with my wife, not while Joe still had one shell left in her gun. Everyone thought the first fine was the real battle. But no, fines were just paper bullets. The first one claimed invasive foliage along the east fence line, $200. The second accused us of running an unauthorized rainwater collection device. Another $200. The third, our mailbox wasn't aesthetic compliant. Translation: Joe had glued old bullet casings to the post and called it folk art. By the end of the second week, we'd racked up 9 violations. Marie wrote them out on the whiteboard in the kitchen, her handwriting sharp and deliberate. Joe slapped a skull and crossbones magnet above the list and labeled it with a smirk: paper bombs. But Marie wasn't laughing. She spent nights at the table with that binder, the HOA charter open like a legal battlefield. "They're not just trying to punish us," she said finally. "They're building a case. Procedural fines to establish behavioral patterns, something they can present to justify seizing the property." I rubbed my temples. English Marie. "They want a trail," she said, meeting my eyes. "Something that makes us look guilty on paper, even if it's nonsense." Joe leaned back, took a sip of her coffee, and muttered, "Let them try. I still remember where I buried the last coyote." The next morning, we didn't just get letters, we got cars. A convoy rolled down the gravel road, 4 black SUVs crawling like sharks, crunching tires slow, deliberate. When the doors opened, Greg stepped out first, clipboard in hand, khakis so pressed they looked like they could cut glass. But he wasn't the problem. Karen was. She moved like a ghost behind them. Beige blouse, wide-brimmed hat, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Calm, silent, calculating. She didn't announce herself, didn't even fake a smile. Just lifted her clipboard like that alone justified walking onto our land. "We're conducting your pre-assessment," she finally said, her voice too cheerful, too polished. "Standard protocol outlined in Section 6C of the Community Charter." I stepped forward, my pulse hammering. "We didn't schedule anything." "You didn't have to," she said sweetly. "Non-response counts as consent." Marie pulled her phone from her pocket, hit record. Joe appeared behind us, rocking her crossbow like it was a newborn baby. Karen's team spread out with tablets and cameras, filming the barn, the garage, even Joe's vegetable garden like it was a crime scene. One of them circled the Mustang, filming every angle like it had violated the Geneva Convention. "What exactly are you inspecting?" Marie asked. "Compliance," Karen chirped. "Lighting fixtures, outbuilding ratios, structural harmony." "You mean vibes?" Marie shot back. Karen didn't answer, just tapped a note on her iPad and kept walking. Joe called out from the porch, her voice gravel and fire. "Y'all better get my good side. This camera's live streaming into the county." They didn't laugh, they didn't stop. And when they finally left, their silence was louder than any threat they could have made. That night, Marie locked herself in the office. By the time I brought her a sandwich, the glow of 3 monitors lit her face, her eyes hollow from staring at code. She pointed to the screen. "I found something." She had broken Greg's password. It was pathetic, his dog's name and a number. But what it unlocked, that was worse than we ever imagined. A folder labeled Phase Map Asset Recovery. Files on every house in our area. Owner names, appraised values, photos, satellite angles, risk ratings, projected resistance. Our home was marked H14. High resistance, high value, red. Pending purchase, owner uncooperative, recommend escalation, legal pathway. I felt the floor shift beneath me. My hands tightened on the back of Marie's chair. "They've already sold the land," she whispered. "They're just waiting for the paperwork to catch up." The next day, I confronted Greg. Found him in his side field, coiling a hose like he wasn't part of a siege. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I just held the printout in front of him. "Your initials are on this." For the first time, Greg's confidence cracked. He looked like someone had handed him a bomb with the pin halfway pulled. "You need to stop looking," he muttered. "You sold us out," I said. "I didn't have a choice. Karen's brother runs Blackbird. They've done this before 3 other counties. By the time people fight back, the zoning's already changed." He looked down, voice shaking. "You've got no idea how big this is." I stepped closer, jaw tight. "We're a ranch," I told him. "We know how to handle snakes." That night the SUVs came back. No plates, lights off. They parked just outside the fence, watching, waiting. Joe stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand. Marie folded her arms beside her, her voice low but steady. "They're waiting to see if we crack." Joe's lips curled into a grin. "Let them. I've made grown men cry with less." We watched the van idle, the headlights glowing faint against the dark. Finally, it pulled away, but it wasn't retreat, it was reconnaissance, a test. The next morning, we found 2 new fines nailed to the gate. One for aggressive gestures with projectile weaponry. Another for unauthorized defensive installations. Joe slammed her coffee onto the table, scowling. Defensive installations? That was a damn tomato cage. And that's when Karen returned. No clipboard this time, just her iPad. She walked the front stretch of the property alone, filming everything. Not everything, just the key points. The barn, the garage, Joe's garden, the Mustang, and the back field where we had found the Blackbird stake. She paused at each one, tapped her notes, moved on. But when she turned to leave, she stopped. One beat longer than she had to. Her eyes locked on Marie. No smile, no words, just calculation. Marie stared back, unblinking. Karen blinked first. That night, the kitchen felt heavier than ever. Marie folded the phase map into a manila folder marked contingency planning. Joe lit a cigarette, staring at the black fields beyond the barn. "They're not going to stop," she said. "No," I whispered. Marie didn't answer. She just pulled out another folder. This one a terrain grid of our land. She spread it across the table like a battle map. And her voice was cold, steady, resolved. "Then it's time to get to work." It started at 2:11 a.m. No headlights, no engine noise, just the low grind of tires over gravel, slow and deliberate, hungry. I was already awake, sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, shotgun laid across my lap like a loyal dog, coffee cold, eyes wide. Sleep wasn't something I trusted anymore, not with them circling, not with Marie upstairs watching the barn cams, not with Joe packing like an old wolf that smelled danger on the wind. My phone buzzed, one word from Marie, company. The van was matte black, no plates, no logos. It rolled to a stop at the edge of the drive. 3 doors opened. 3 men stepped out, boots, gloves, radios crackling low. They didn't walk like neighbors. They walked like contractors who'd played soldier too many times overseas. One moved for the barn. One circled toward the back door. And the last, the boldest, came straight up the porch path like he already owned the place. Marie joined me, silent, her pistol holstered, phone in hand. Joe pushed the screen door open, her robe tied, hair pulled back, but in her arms she held Grandpa Ead's shotgun like it was a violin she'd spent her whole life tuning. The porch man's voice was calm, too calm. "Sir, we're with HOA emergency compliance. Property flagged for fire hazard and code breach. Step aside for inspection." I didn't move. "You're not police." "Private enforcement," he said smoothly. "Authorized under Sundown Ridge Board jurisdiction." "You have a badge?" I asked. His jaw flexed. "We don't need one." Jo stepped forward, her voice gravel and gunpowder. "You sure about that, son?" For the first time, he hesitated. She pumped the shotgun once. That sound ripped through the night. He took a step back. The man at the barn reached for the latch. Bad move. A trip wire snapped. A homemade rigged slingshot fired a canister of bear spray straight into his chest. The can exploded in a cloud of orange haze, coating him in fire and fury. He screamed, stumbling, clawing at his eyes like he'd walked into a hornet's nest set ablaze. Marie whispered, "That one was Joe's design." Jo grinned, teeth sharp in the porch light. Homemade justice. The third man, circling the back, sprinted toward the gravel path. He never saw it. Pressure pad buried under the stones. His foot slammed down. The ground erupted in white. 30,000 lumens of rage, motion lights exploding on all at once. The entire ranch lit up like Judgment Day. The man froze, blinded, stumbling, his arms flailing like a moth caught in a furnace. Jo raised the shotgun, fired one clean warning blast into the sky. Not at him, not near him, just enough to tell the night it wasn't welcome anymore. They broke, no threats, no posturing, just raw, tactical retreat, the bear-sprayed man screaming, the blinded one crashing into the fence, the porch man yanking them both back toward the van. They ran, and when the doors slammed shut, the gravel spit fire behind them as they fled. For a long moment, the only sound left was Joe's steady breathing and the faint hum of the floodlights buzzing overhead. 20 minutes later, red and blue glow crept up the road. 2 sheriff's deputies, no sirens, no urgency. They stepped out with hands in their pockets. I gave them everything, descriptions, footage, even the fake license plate Marie had recorded. "They tried to grab my wife," I told them. The taller one chewed on his toothpick. "Did they succeed?" I stared at him. "That's your line, that's your question." His partner shifted. "You discharged a firearm." Jo answered before I could, her voice steady, steel behind it. "No, sir, I defended my land." They didn't like that answer, but they didn't push. They got back in their cruiser with a half-hearted, "We'll file it," and drove away. Back inside, Marie scrubbed the footage frame by frame. Her face paled as she pointed. "They weren't guessing," she said. "Look, he didn't even check the side entrance. He skipped the one blind spot in our coverage." Jo leaned closer, her jaw tightening. "Someone told him where to go." "They split zones," Marie whispered. "One on me, one on Joe, one on the barn. That's a textbook 3-point breach." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. This wasn't a scare tactic. Marie nodded, her face hard. This was a dry run. We didn't sleep after that. Couldn't. Instead, we got to work. Jo dug a trench behind the barn, lined it with broken glass, Tabasco packets, and a nail strip she welded out of barbed wire. She called it old-school gardening. I built a false path to the side gate, pressure triggers buried under gravel, wired to paintball grenades filled with skunk oil and fluorescent dye. If they stepped wrong, they wouldn't just smell it, they'd wear it. For weeks. Marie updated the network. Firewalls, feeds, even renamed our Wi-Fi routers. FBI Truck 103, totally normal HOA surveillance van. She grinned when she saw Jo laugh at it. "We're not hiding anymore," she said. "We're baiting." That night, Jo ladled stew into bowls. We ate quiet, every clink of the spoon louder than it should have been. Then we heard it. A buzz, low, sharp, mechanical. A drone. It zipped over the barn, circling fast and low. Watching, recording. Jo didn't flinch. She took one slow sip of tea, stood, and walked inside. She came back with Grandpa Ede's scoped pellet rifle, handed me her mug. "Hold this," she said. She raised the scope. One breath, one shot. The drone dropped like a crow from the sky. No smile, no cheer. Jo just sat back down, picked up her mug, and kept eating. Marie grinned across the table, her eyes fierce. "I married into the right damn family." We buried the drone in the garden, and then, with a little twist of irony, sent up our own rigged drone. This one carried a GPS tracker and a dummy GoPro. The men who came to collect their lost toy didn't know the real memory chip was recording the entire time. And what it captured changed everything. 2 days after we shot their drone out of the sky, something changed. Greg's house went silent. No truck in the drive, no porch light, no sign of him coiling hoses or packing the yard with his clipboard. The gate creaked in the wind, the flagpole was down, and his trash cans hadn't moved in days. It looked like he'd been vacuum-sealed right out of existence. Jo stood at the pasture fence, binoculars pressed to her eyes. Her voice was flat. Rats don't leave the ship unless they know who lit the fire. That night Marie found it, a new entry buried deep inside the HOA's private logs. She cracked it with Karen's own password, stolen from metadata she'd scraped off their iPad. On her monitor, a single line blinked, Phase 2 complete. Initiate Phase 3, full transfer coordination. Marie's voice was ice. They're done testing us. Jo rolled her shoulders. Finally, then what do we do? Marie closed the folder, her jaw tight. We make it hurt to cross the fence. The wait didn't last long. 5 days later, they came again. Not 3 this time, 6. Kevlar vests, utility gloves, earpieces. They didn't walk like neighbors. They moved like mercenaries who'd been promised a bonus. One carried a crowbar. Another gripped a battering ram like he'd stolen it from a SWAT truck. And 10 paces behind them, calm as ever, came Karen. Tan trench coat, sunglasses, clipboard tucked under her arm like she was filming a documentary called How I Lost a Lawsuit in 12 Easy Steps. But this time, she didn't bring the HOA SUVs. She brought a white box truck labeled Horizon Utility Services. Nothing says, we're the good guys, like a fake plumbing company rolling up your driveway. Jo spotted them first, chewing jerky on the barn roof, binoculars scanning the tree line. Her voice crackled through the walkie. They're back, and they brought toys. Copy, Marie answered from the kitchen. Engaging Operation Honogo. I was crouched in the workshop, watching the gate through a narrow slot in the siding. We didn't run this time. We waited. At 10:44 a.m., the first boot crossed our property line. That's when the welcome mat bit back. A thin perimeter wire snapped, triggering a homemade strobe mine. A blinding flash detonated, shrieking through the air. The clipboard man hit the ground screaming, clutching his eyes. I can't see. The second guy rushed forward to help and impaled his boot on Joe's spike mat. Rebar and roofing nails welded to plywood, hidden under a scatter of dirt. He went down screaming, pulling clipboard man with him. They rolled into a heap of blood and curses. Jo chuckled into her radio. Well, ain't that just poetry? 2 more broke off, circling toward the barn. Bad idea. They tripped a waist-high wire strung between the fence posts. Splat! A burst of pressurized PVC exploded overhead, showering them in industrial-grade epoxy mixed with fluorescent orange dye. It didn't just stain, it stuck. One howled, clutching his face. The other tripped into the gooseberry patch, screaming about thorns and dignity all at once. Marie threw the switch. The yard floodlights blasted on, 30,000 lumens. The ranch looked like it was being invaded by UFOs. Then she hit switch 2. Speakers hidden in the barn walls roared to life. Her voice boomed, spliced with old wartime broadcasts and Orwell quotes, warped into something monstrous. Unauthorized entry detected. Compliance invalid. Leave immediately or face reprocessing. Obey the garden. This land is not for sale. This land is a trap. The effect was terrifying. Neighbors lined the fences with their phones. A man in a lawn chair cracked a beer. Told y'all not to mess with Grandma Jo, he yelled. A woman across the street hollered, World Star. Someone actually clapped. Jo curtsied from the barn roof. The 5th enforcer finally staggered to the porch, battering ram raised. He swung. Clang! The steel-plated door didn't budge. He swung again. Marie and I braced behind it. Jo lined up her shot from the roof. One pellet from Grandpa Eat's rifle cracked into the base of his neck. He dropped the ram and faceplanted in the flower bed, groaning like a child told recess was over. And through it all, Karen just filmed, silent, unflinching. But when one of her men, covered in epoxy and humiliation, staggered toward her, I saw it. Her nostrils flared, just for a second, a crack in the mask. Then Marie hit send. Inside the barn, she stood over 3 glowing monitors, headset on, tablet in hand. Ink squad disabled, porch contact blinded, upload in 3, 2. She clicked. Smile Karen. At that exact second, Joe triggered the barn spotlight. A 5,000 lumen beam snapped on, pinning Karen in the light like she was walking a red carpet to hell. Her phone buzzed, she glanced down, froze. And then it spread like wildfire. Marie's digital payload dropped online. HOA blackmail contracts, Blackbird development wire transfers, drone footage from the first raid, the entire Phase 3 seizure flowchart. Within minutes, 6 news outlets had it. Whistleblower boards lit up. The state attorney general's tip line flooded. By sundown, #Sundown Siege was trending. Karen didn't yell, didn't panic. She just turned, slow and deliberate, and walked back to her fake utility truck. Her men limped behind her, dye-stained, one sobbing. Joe cupped her hands and shouted after them, "Next time, bring cupcakes." The news hit faster than we could blink. First, a fringe blog, then the local paper, then national headlines. Militia family fortifies ranch against rogue HOA takeover. They called us survivalists, they called us radicals. But they called us right. That night we sat on the porch in the silence of a battlefield after smoke clears. Joe's shotgun rested across her knees. Marie's laptop chimed once, faint. One new message, no subject line, just a photo. Karen, standing next to a man at a private gun range, his wrist tattooed with a black feather wrapped around a globe. Marie stared at it for a long time, then she whispered his name. Dax Duval, her brother, the founder of Blackbird, and the architect of the entire damn operation. We thought Karen was the head of the snake, but when that photo came through, her standing next to a man at a private gun range, tattoo of a black feather curling around a globe, it was like the ground shifted under us. Marie zoomed in, her voice flat. Dax Duval, ex-Marine Force Recon, dishonorable discharge 2013, disappeared off-grid, reappeared 3 years later with a clean record and a multi-million-dollar real estate operation. She turned the screen toward us, her eyes cold. Founder of Blackbird, Karen's brother, and the architect of this entire thing. Joe cracked her knuckles, muttering like she'd just been handed an old enemy's name. Guess I better start sharpening the stakes. But Marie wasn't done. She pulled up a map she'd pieced together from the files. 4 neighborhoods, 3 counties, every one of them marked in red, every one labeled acquired. Each followed the same pattern. A new HOA board elected, a sudden spike in non-compliance fines, properties seized, families rehomed under the guise of compliance sales, and within 2 weeks, Blackbird-affiliated firms breaking ground. It's an ops model, Marie said quietly. Destabilize, document, displace, rebuild, repeat. I stared at the screen, bile rising in my throat. And Greg. Marie's fingers clicked across the keys. A blinking location pin appeared over Costa Rica. Bought out, off books. Wire transfers routed through 3 LLCs. He sold us out for a beach and a tax shelter. Joe spat into her tin. Scumbag traded his land for a pina colada. Marie clicked another folder. Phase 3 onboarding, Sundown Ridge. Floor plans for 22 new builds, 6 weeks from now. I shook my head. That's 22 families unless someone stops them. Marie leaned back, eyes dark. We can't stop this with blogs and news articles. They'll bury it in red tape before it sticks. We need something they can't delete, something they can't spin. And that's when she found it. Buried under a shell company file labeled Dovetail Energy Services. A staging site 3 counties over, coordinates, training schedules, asset logs. This is where they train their compliance teams, Marie said. Where they run the public scripts, the de-escalation guides. It's not just enforcement, they're running psychological warfare. Joe smiled, sharp as broken glass. Well, I've got a good feeling about this one. Marie didn't want us to go, but when I saw the fear in her eyes, I knew we had to. I packed 2 burner phones, 1 flash drive loaded with Marie's malware, and my sidearm. Joe stuffed granola bars and a GoPro hidden in a bag of Werther's originals. She also slipped 3 throwing knives into her jacket pocket. When Marie saw us at the driveway, she didn't yell. She just pressed the flash drive into my palm. "You won't get a second chance," she whispered. "If something goes wrong, upload this. Everywhere you can. It won't save you, but it'll bury them." The site was quiet, too quiet. A long dirt road led to a chain-link fence crowned with new padlocks. In the center stood a converted barn with antennas stabbing the sky like a crown of thorns. We parked a quarter-mile out, crawled through brush, and reached the fence. I started cutting the padlock with bolt cutters. Joe stopped me. "Look," she said, pointing to a shadow in the trees, a motion sensor nearly invisible. She picked up a rock and hurled it across the field. It bounced once, tripping the beam. A red light blinked, swiveled, then fell still. No alarm. "Dummy zone," Joe whispered. "Now move." Inside smelled like oil and paper. Tactical vests stacked along the wall. Fresh polos embroidered with Sundown Ridge HOA still folded in plastic wrap. Joe picked up a binder, flipped it open. Engagement sequence. Non-compliant targets, public script protocols, civic imaging guides, manipulating surveillance optics. "They weren't just training enforcers," Joe muttered. "They were training actors." In the back room we found it. The H14 folder, our home. Thick red stamped threat variable profile, high resist tier. Inside, satellite photos, heat maps, security tags, my routines, Marie's work hours, Joe's daily patterns. And then Josh. Photos of our grandson playing with his remote control car in the yard. A bolded line beneath, teen male. Potential neuroprofile, surveillance familiarity, moderate threat if radicalized. Joe's hand trembled as she gripped the folder. "They flagged my grandson," she whispered. I flipped the page. Another photo, Joe herself rocking on the porch with her shotgun. Beneath it, older female, probable protester history, ex-military family ties, high confrontation risk. Joe's eyes hardened. "That's what they think this is, a confrontation," she shook her head. "This isn't confrontation, this is family." The server room hummed with heat, drives blinking, uplink antennas buzzing. Marie's voice crackled in my earpiece. "Don't pull anything, don't copy, you'll trigger a tracer ping." "Then what?" I whispered. "Inject, I just sent the Trojan. Plug the drive, wait for green." I slid the flash drive into the port. The light blinked once, twice, then green. We ran. Back home, Marie tracked the uplink, first to a dummy server in Colorado, then to a law office in Atlanta. Finally, straight into the backbone of a state zoning department. Her hands shook. They embedded the HOA into municipal infrastructure. Karen didn't just buy soldiers, she bought cities. Joe lit a cigarette, her face a storm. "And the sheriff." Marie didn't look up. "He's on their payroll, that's why he never filed our reports." We sat in silence, the truth settling like ash. This wasn't about one ranch, it wasn't even about Sundown Ridge. It was about everyone like us. Families pushed out, priced out, buried under fines and red tape, their lives paved over for profit. Marie closed her laptop with finality. "We have everything now, their plans, their networks, their communications. We can drop it tonight. Go nuclear, burn them to the ground." Joe leaned forward, eyes fierce. "Drop it now, let the world choke on it." Marie shook her head. "If we spook them, they scatter, lawyer up, disappear. We have one shot at total exposure, one." They both looked at me. At the blinking cursor on the flash drive. At the feed of our empty driveway. At the land outside that had raised us, broken us, loved us. I took a breath, my voice didn't shake. "We wait, we watch, but when we move, we burn it to the ground." It happened at dawn. 6:04 a.m. to be exact. The ridge lit up with the glare of headlights. 2 black SUVs crawled up the gravel, followed by an armored van painted with bold white letters. Utility Enforcement, Southern Region. It wasn't a real agency, but it looked official enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. Marie was already at her war desk upstairs, 3 monitors glowing across her face, headset snug, her voice steady in my earpiece. Joe sat on the porch, calm as a sniper at sunrise, thermos in one hand, .45 on her hip, shotgun across her knees. "They brought the whole circus this time," Joe muttered. "Don't shoot first," I told her. Her lips curled. Who said anything about first? The SUVs skidded to a stop, doors slammed, and then they stepped out. Karen first, calm, silent, her iPad tucked close. Her face was unreadable, but her body carried the tension of someone who'd already decided how the morning would end. Then him. Dax, her brother, clean beard, military stance, gloves tight, eyes cold. He didn't film like Karen. He scanned, calculated, a predator sizing up prey. Behind them came 6 enforcers, gear strapped tight, batons, gas masks, shields, contractors who thought they were soldiers. Marie's voice buzzed in my ear. "Thermal confirms weapons, 2 drones deployed. This is full engagement. They're not bluffing." Joe's eyes narrowed. "You ready to make them earn it?" I nodded. We started the countdown. The first drone swooped low over the barn. Marie's fingers flew. She hijacked the signal midair. The drone veered, spiraled, and slammed into the hood of the second SUV. Boom, engine caught fire. The front tire burst. Flames licked the paint. 2 enforcers broke formation, running to put it out. They didn't see the trench. Spikes ripped through their boots. Mud sucked them down to the knees. Both went down screaming, clawing at the ground. Joe stood from her chair, raised the shotgun, and fired. Not at them, straight overhead. A single booming warning shot that echoed across the valley. Marie flipped a switch. The sonic disruptor kicked in, an old frequency spike she'd rigged out of scrap metal and speakers. A piercing 120 decibels ripped through the air. 2 more enforcers dropped instantly, clutching their ears, ripping out their earpieces, one vomiting into the gravel. Dax barked orders, dragging them back to their feet. He pushed 2 more toward the north side of the barn. Bad move. They stepped onto what looked like solid ground. In an instant, the dirt gave way. A mud pit rig Joe had baited with false planks. They sank waist-deep, thrashing, screaming, the mud sucking harder the more they fought. One tried to lift his rifle. Joe calmly lined up with her pellet gun and cracked him in the collarbone. He dropped the weapon, howling. Karen lifted her iPad. Marie jammed it remotely. The screen froze. Karen tapped it once, twice. Her jaw twitched. For the first time, Karen had no orders to give. And then Dax moved. He didn't hesitate. He didn't bark. He charged straight at me, gun raised. I stepped forward to meet him. His boots pounded the dirt. He shoved me hard, sending me stumbling back. His voice was a growl. "You think you won? You're a speck, a fossil. We are the future." He raised his gun. My blood went cold. I shifted left just as his weight carried him forward. His boots slammed down. The earth snapped open. Dax plunged into the net trap Joe had rigged, barbed wire woven into burlap soaked in motor oil. He hit hard, thrashing, snarling like a wild animal caught in its own snare. Joe stepped up beside me, shotgun steady, eyes like steel. She looked down at him the way you look at a fire that's already burned the barn down. "Big talk," she muttered, "for a man who just fell into his own legacy." Dax spat mud, his voice ragged. "This isn't over." Joe cocked the shotgun, leaned in close. "It is for you." The last enforcer dropped his baton and walked away. Karen stood alone at the gate, her face stone, motionless. But Marie's livestream was already climbing. 20,000, 50, over 200,000 people watching in real time as the siege collapsed. Dawn at sundown exploded across the screen. 40 minutes later, a sheriff from 2 counties over arrived. The real kind this time. Badge, backup, no clipboard. Dax was cuffed and read his rights on camera. Karen didn't move, didn't protest, didn't flinch when her men were dragged away, when the flash drive was handed to investigators, when her entire empire fell apart in the glow of 1,000 cell phone screens. But I saw it. Her hand trembling. Just for a moment. The mask had cracked. 2 weeks later, the HOA was gone. Dissolved by court order. Karen's name was dragged across headlines, her brother's mugshot plastered on every evening broadcast. Dax Duval, indicted on racketeering, fraud, conspiracy. Karen, sued by over a dozen homeowners whose lives she had tried to bulldoze. The empire she'd built on fines and fear crumbled in real time. For the first time in months, our gate was quiet. No SUVs idling with their lights off. No neon orange notices zip-tied to the fence. Just the soft hum of summer and the creak of the rocking chair on the porch. But quiet didn't mean peace. Karen didn't apologize. Not once. Not in court. Not when her bank accounts were frozen, not when neighbors testified against her, not when her iPad full of fake bylaws was paraded in front of a jury. Joe cornered her once outside the courthouse. Walked right up, close enough that Karen had to tilt her chin to meet her eyes. "You ever gonna say sorry?" Joe asked. Karen blinked, no. Joe tilted her head, almost smiling. "You know what the difference is between us." Karen didn't answer. Joe leaned closer, her voice low. "I protect what I love, you just collect what you hate." Then she walked away, leaving Karen to choke on silence. Rumor says Karen packed up what was left of her life and moved into her sister's condo in Florida. Some say she's still hiding behind paperwork, still clinging to bylaws no one respects anymore. I almost feel sorry for her. Almost. Life on the ranch shifted in small ways. Josh, our grandson, finished his digital engineering certificate that fall, built his own drone jammer out of scraps and circuits he'd scavenged. He painted the casing white and stenciled one word across it, Karen. Marie laughed for the first time in weeks when she saw it. Marie herself got 2 job offers from cybersecurity firms, one in Dallas, one in Denver, both with salaries that could have bought us 5 ranches. She turned them down. "Why?" I asked her. She stared at the fence line, at the field where we dug trenches and buried traps. "Because there's still land worth protecting." Joe didn't change much. She still sat on the porch every evening, shotgun resting across her lap like it was part of her heartbeat. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at the tree line, her eyes distant, as if she were daring someone to try again. And me, I checked the fence every night. Checked the sensors, the cameras, the alarms, not because I was afraid, but because of what Joe said that night as we reset the last of the traps. "They didn't just come for land," she muttered, cigarette smoke curling into the air. "They came to erase what it meant, who we were, what we built." And she was right. Land is more than dirt. It's memory. It's sweat. It's a promise you make to the people who came before you and the ones who'll come after. When Karen's empire fell, it wasn't because of lawyers or loopholes. It fell because she underestimated that promise. She thought we'd give up, sell out, roll over like Greg. But we didn't. We mined the land with memory. And when the fuse burned down, when the fire hit the powder, she learned the hard way, some lines you cross once and you don't come back from. For weeks, neighbors stopped by. Some brought pie, some brought beer, most brought questions. "How'd you do it?" they ask. The truth is we didn't, not alone. Every file Marie hacked, every trap Joe built, every moment caught on live stream, every neighbor who raised a phone and recorded the chaos. It was all of us. It was survival stitched together with stubbornness. And it worked. But even with Karen gone, Dax behind bars, and the HOA shattered, something lingered. A shadow. A reminder that the game wasn't just played in our valley, it stretched across counties, states, maybe the whole country. Marie would sit at her desk late, scrolling through feeds, maps, court documents. Sometimes she'd pause, her eyes narrowing, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. "What is it?" I ask. "Just patterns," she'd whisper. "Too many patterns." I knew what she meant. Blackbird hadn't started with us, and it hadn't ended with us either. And one night, as the stars burned above the ridge and the crickets sang in the grass, she finally said it out loud. "They'll be back, maybe not here, maybe not us, but somewhere they'll try again." Joe snorted, tapping ash off her cigarette. "Then I hope whoever they mess with has a garden full of barbed wire and a spine full of steel." I didn't laugh, I didn't need to. Because she was right. The war wasn't over, not really. But for now, for this ranch, for this family, we'd won. And that was enough. The court called it justice. The papers called it exposure. The news called it the sundown siege. But when I sit on the porch at night, rocking slow with Joe's shotgun leaning against the rail and Marie's glow from her office window spilling into the dark, I know better. What we lived through wasn't just a legal case or a news story. It was survival. Some folks think the battle ends when the judge slams the gavel, when the sheriff slaps on the cuffs, when the bank accounts get frozen. But battles like this don't end. Not really. Because the people who build empires out of fear, they don't quit. They adapt. They crawl out from the rubble and start again somewhere else. Karen's gone now. Last I heard, she's in Florida, living in her sister's condo, hiding from her own name. Dax is locked away, stripped of the empire he thought he'd built out of paperwork and mercenaries. But there's always another Karen. Another Dax. Another blackbird waiting for the right moment to spread its wings. That's the lesson my grandfather left me, the one that carried us through every night of gunmetal fear and neon notices nailed to the gate. You don't prepare for the fight you see coming. You prepare for the one they'll pretend isn't happening. And he was right. The fight wasn't about fines, or bylaws, or noise complaints. It wasn't even about the land, not really. It was about memory. About what this dirt meant to us. The pine tree my grandfather planted by the corral. The barn that echoed with the roar of a rebuilt Mustang. The porch swing that rattled every time thunder rolled over the ridge. Every laugh, every fight, every scar we left on this ground was a line in a story worth defending. That's what Karen never understood. To her, land was an asset. To us, it was blood. The night we reset the traps for the last time, Joe lit a cigarette and stared into the dark. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. They didn't come to take land. They came to erase what it meant, who we were, what we built. And she was right. That's why we fought like we did. Why Marie spent nights in front of 3 glowing screens, hacking into systems that were supposed to be untouchable. Why Joe kept sharpening stakes and setting snares like the war was still coming. Why I sat with a shotgun across my lap, waiting for headlights that might never crest the ridge. It wasn't paranoia. It was memory turned into defense. When we fought, we weren't just protecting a ranch. We were protecting the promise that memory can't be bulldozed, that you can't pave over family, that there are some lines you cross once and you never come back from. Josh asked me once why we didn't just sell and leave. Why we didn't pack up like Greg, trade our home for a beach and a piña colada somewhere far away. I told him the truth. Because freedom isn't found on a map. It's carved into the ground beneath your boots. It's welded into the steel of a car you rebuilt with your own hands. It's whispered in the voice of your grandmother when she dares 3 trespassers to test her aim. You don't walk away from that. You defend it. Every trap we set, every file we leaked, every night we stood against headlights in the dark, those weren't just acts of resistance. They were acts of love. And love, when it's cornered, fights harder than fear ever will. The reporters eventually stopped calling. The neighbors eventually stopped asking. The world moved on, but we didn't. Every night I checked the fence, checked the sensors, checked the motion lights, not because I'm afraid, but because I remember. I remember the night they came for us. The night the sky lit up with 30,000 lumens of judgment. The night mercenaries stumbled blind through mud pits and barbed wire, while Joe's voice boomed through the speakers, spliced with war broadcasts and Orwell quotes. I remember Karen's hand trembling when she thought no one was watching. I remember Dax snarling from inside his own trap, promising it wasn't over. And I remember the silence that followed when it was. Maybe someday they'll try again. Maybe somewhere else, someone will wake up to SUVs parked outside their gate and fines stacked like paper bombs on their kitchen table. Maybe another family will hear the same lie we did, that resistance is futile. If they do, I hope they know the truth. The truth that we learned with dirt under our nails and fire in our lungs. The truth that saved us when the world thought we'd break. That land isn't just property. It's memory. And memory, once mined, becomes a battlefield no mercenary can ever win. So I sit here still, same chair, same dirt, same sky stretching wide over 15 acres of freedom. And every night before I go to bed, I whisper the same promise. Not on my land. Not with my family. Not ever.